I'm Terry Olguin with the Learning and Professional Development Team, and welcome to this training session on the discharge process. This session is designed for skilled nurses who report patient discharges. Let's get started by discussing our objectives. The objectives for this class are to review the discharge process in the hospice system for live discharges and a discharge due to death, and of course those changes to the process for McKesson Hospice. We will also learn how to complete the HIS discharge tool. We will learn of the hospice script and the bereavement process. There are 4 different discharge forms to select from. The skilled nurse will select the most appropriate form just as they do today. The forms are the Discharge Transfer Summary Form, the Discharge Transfer Summary Form Non-Visit, the Death Report Summary and Medication Disposal, the Death Report Summary and Medication Disposal Non-Visit. The non-visit forms do not have time slips and are rarely used. Here is a glance at the players in the discharge process. It begins with the nurse conducting the discharge visit and completing one of the discharge forms. Next, the MCP will complete the HIS discharge form. When the HIS discharge form is validated and completed, the information will flow to McKesson Hospice and update that patient's status in both McKesson and the hospice system. The final few steps are then performed by the SRC in McKesson Hospice. The SRC will indate the CE or hospice specialist role in associated personnel. The associated facility and the room and board event will also be updated. Let's walk through the live discharge process first. It begins with the nurse selecting either the Discharge Transfer Summary or the Discharge Transfer Summary Non-Visit form from the discharge packet in the system. The nurse will complete the clinical information sections, the time slip information, and obtain the patient signature. Then the nurse will sign and send to office using the functionality of the hospice system. Now that the clinician has completed the discharge form, it is time for the MCP to perform the next steps in the process, that is, the HIS step. Simply open the HIS discharge form and review the auto-populated discharge detail entered on the live discharge form. Update any needed information on the HIS discharge form, followed by completing the Z0400 and the Z0500 sections. Next, use a Validate link to check for errors. Lastly, complete the HIS form. The information in McKesson that gets updated includes the discharge or transfer date, the discharge condition, the discharge disposition, the discharge reason. So that means the site revenue coordinator has less work to do to finish out the discharge process in the office and in McKesson Hospice. The final steps are for the site revenue coordinator or SRC to perform in McKesson Hospice. Very similar to what happens today. The SRC will indate the associated personnel, but now there are fewer personnel to indate. In fact, it should only be the hospice specialist that we should see under associated personnel. Also, indate the facility and the room and board event. Now, let's take a look at the discharge due to death process. The discharge due to death process is very similar. You will notice all of the same steps for the nurse and the MCP. Select the Death Report Summary and Medication Disposal or the Death Report Summary and Medication Disposal Non-Visit. Complete the clinical discharge information, complete time slip section, and the caregiver signs. Complete comments section as appropriate. The clinician signs and sends to office. Now that the clinician has completed the death discharge form, it is time for the MCP to perform the next steps in the process, that is, the HIS step. Simply open the HIS discharge form and review the auto-populated discharge detail. Update any needed information on the HIS discharge form, followed by completing the Z0400 and the Z0500 sections. Next, use a Validate link to check for errors. Finally, complete the HIS discharge form. When the HIS tool is completed, the information in McKesson is updated in real time. The information in McKesson Hospice then gets updated in the hospice system to include the death date and time, the discharge condition, discharge disposition, discharge reason. That means this is less for the SRC to complete for the office discharge process. The final steps are for the Site Revenue Coordinator or SRC to perform, and these are very similar to what happens today. The SRC will indate the associated personnel, which includes the CE role or hospice specialist, and indate the facility and the room and board event. In the next few slides, we will walk through the HIS discharge tool that is completed by the office. Let's take a closer look at the HIS clinical form in the hospice system. Once the patient is selected, look under the office forms header. The office forms are listed alphabetically. You will need to scroll down in order to find it. The document is called Hospice Item Set Discharge. The information on the form will default from the discharge form completed by the clinician. The MCP will complete any additional information. Next, you will data enter information in the Z0400 and the Z0500 as required for submission. Click on the Save button to save the information. The screen will close. When this happens, you are taken back to the patient chart. Simply click on the Hospice Item Set Discharge form to reopen the form so that you can click on the Validate link. Click on the Validation link to check for errors before selecting the Complete button. Once all errors are resolved, scroll down to the bottom of the page and click the Complete button. Once this form is completed, the admission status of the patient will change to discharge in both McKesson Hospice and the hospice system. Next, we will touch base on the hospice script process. The communication is automated. In the hospice script system, the patient will remain in an active state until midnight of the discharge date. No further action is needed for hospice script. In the situation where you need to notify hospice script of drug diversion prevention, you will still need to contact hospice script directly. Lastly, we will briefly talk about the bereavement process. Process remains the same for the IDG to discuss the discharge or transfer to bereavement status at the final IDG. Print the final IDG and plan of care form as needed for the bereavement file, as the hospice system will not be used for any bereavement activity. So in review, and to wrap up our session, we have talked about the live discharge process, the discharge due to death process. Then we took a step-by-step look at how to complete the HIS discharge tool. And lastly, we talked briefly about the hospice script process and the transfer to bereavement process. Thank you for attending the hospice system discharge training. That concludes this Gentiva Link training session. Thank you for your participation, and we hope you found this session informative and helpful as we collaborate together to deliver uncompromising care. Thank you.